The morning sun of the twin stars shone through the tall windows of Galactic Academy. The light was orange and warm. It fell on the rows of seats where students from many different worlds sat waiting for class to begin. Professor Voron walked into the room. He was tall and thin. His skin was pale blue, and he had 4 eyes that moved in different directions. He came from a planet called Nexar, a world known for its great scholars and scientists. Voron was one of the best teachers at the academy. He taught xenobiology, the study of life forms from different planets. Today was a special day. Voron had planned to teach about the most famous survival story in galactic history. He placed his datapad on the desk and looked at his students. There were over 50 of them. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had tentacles. And in the back corner, sitting alone near the window, was a young female student with soft brown eyes and black hair. She looked different from the others. She was half human. Her name was Park Hannah. She was 20 years old. Her mother was human, and her father was from the water world of Delphus. Hannah did not talk much. She always sat in the back. She always listened carefully, but she never raised her hand. The other students did not know much about her. She kept to herself. Voron cleared his throat. The room became quiet. "Good morning, students," he said. His voice was deep and smooth. "Today we will study something very interesting. We will talk about survival. Not just any survival. We will talk about the most impossible survival story ever recorded in galactic history." The students leaned forward. They liked these kinds of lessons. Survival stories were always exciting. Voron touched his datapad. A large image appeared on the wall behind him. It showed a massive ship floating in space. The ship was old and broken. Parts of it were burned. The name on the side read Eternal Dawn. "This," Voron said, "is the colony ship Eternal Dawn." It was a human vessel. It left Earth 120 years ago. It carried 212 human passengers. They were families. Men, women, and children. They were going to a new planet to start a new life. He touched the pad again. The image changed. Now it showed a planet. The planet was dark red and covered with thick clouds. Lightning flashed in the clouds. The surface looked hot and dangerous. "This is Kairos 7, Voron said. "It is what we call a death world. The air is poison. The temperature can reach 70 degrees. The ground is covered with sharp rocks and boiling rivers. And the creatures that live there are some of the most dangerous in the galaxy." A student with green scales raised his hand. "Professor, why did the ship go there?" Voron nodded. "Good question. The ship did not mean to go there. There was an accident. The engine failed. The Eternal Dawn lost control and crashed on Kairos 7. It was not their choice. It was bad luck." The students whispered to each other. They had heard of death worlds before. No one survived on death worlds. That was why they were called death worlds, Voron continued. When the ship crashed, only 198 humans survived. 14 people died in the crash. The rest were hurt, scared, and alone on a planet that wanted to kill them. He paused and looked around the room. "Now, let me ask you something. How long do you think they survived?" A student with purple fur raised her hand. "Maybe a few days?" Another student said, "A week at most." Voron smiled. It was a cold smile. "Those are good guesses. But you are wrong. The humans on Kairos 7 survived for 30 years. The room went silent. No one could believe it. 30 years on a death world? That was not possible. 30 years, Voron repeated. They built homes. They found food. They raised children. They lived. And when a rescue ship finally found them, there were over 300 humans on that planet. More than when they started. A student in the front row shook his head. That cannot be true, Professor. How could soft creatures like humans survive on a death world? They have no claws, no scales, no poison. They are weak. Warren raised one of his long fingers. That is exactly what makes this story so important. Humans are weak. Their bodies are soft. They cannot breathe poison. They cannot survive extreme heat. And yet, they did. That is why we call it the impossible survival story. In the back corner, Park Hannah stopped writing in her notebook. She looked up at the image of the planet on the wall. Her eyes were calm, but something in them changed. She knew this story. She knew it very well. Warren touched his datapad again. A new image appeared. It showed a group of humans standing in front of a rough shelter made of rocks and metal from the crashed ship. They looked tired and dirty, but they were alive. In the front of the group stood a man and a woman. The man was tall and strong. He had a serious face. The woman beside him was smaller, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. These, Lauren said, are the leaders of the survivors. The man was called Kim Tae. He was a simple engineer on the ship. He knew how to build things and fix things. When the captain died in the crash, Kim Tae took control. He organized the survivors. He gave them hope. He pointed to the woman. And this is Lee Soo. She was a doctor and a scientist. She studied the plants and animals of Cairo 7. She found ways to make medicine from poison. She saved many lives. The students stared at the image. The two humans looked so ordinary, so plain. How could such simple creatures survive on a planet that killed everything? Warren put his hands behind his back. Over the next hour, I will tell you the full story of the Eternal Dawn survivors. I will show you what they faced. I will explain how they lived. And at the end, I will ask you one question. Was it skill or was it luck? Hannah looked down at her notebook. She had drawn a small picture of the planet Cairo 7. Next to it, she had written two names, Kim Tae and Lee Soo. Underneath the names, she had written one word, family. No one in the class noticed. No one saw what she had written. They were all looking at the professor, waiting to hear more about the impossible survival story. But Hannah already knew the story. She had heard it many times before. She had heard it from her mother. She had heard it from her grandmother. She had read the old journals that sat in a box under her bed. Kim Tae and Lee Soo were not just names in a history lesson. They were her great-grandparents. The impossible survival story was her family history. And as the professor began to speak again, Hannah sat quietly in the corner, waiting to see how much of the truth he really knew. Professor Warren walked slowly across the front of the classroom. His four eyes moved over the students as he spoke. They were all listening carefully now. The story of the Eternal Dawn had caught their attention. Let me tell you about Cairo 7, Warren said. Let me tell you why no one should have survived there. Not for 30 years. Not for 30 days. Not even for 30 hours. He touched his datapad. A new image appeared on the wall. It showed the surface of the planet. The ground was dark red, covered with sharp rocks that looked like broken glass. Steam rose from cracks in the earth. In the distance, a river of boiling water flowed between the rocks. The temperature on Cairo 7 can reach 70 degrees during the day, Warren explained. At night, it drops to 30 degrees. This sounds better, but it is not. The change happens very fast. In just 1 hour, the temperature can drop 40 degrees. Most life forms cannot handle such changes. Their bodies shut down. A student raised his hand. What about the air, Professor? Warren nodded. Good question. The air on Cairo 7 is poison to most species. It contains high levels of sulfur and ammonia. One breath can burn your lungs. Humans need oxygen to live. There is very little oxygen on Cairo 7. The survivors had to find ways to create their own clean air, or they would die within minutes. The students looked at each other. They were beginning to understand how dangerous this planet was. But the air and the heat were not the worst problems, Varun continued. His voice became lower. The worst problems were the creatures. He touched his datapad again. A new image appeared. It showed a large beast with 6 legs and a long tail. Its skin was thick and covered with hard plates. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth. But the most terrible thing about the creature was its eyes. They were red and empty, like the eyes of a monster from a nightmare. This is a Kairos hunter, Varun said. It is one of the top predators on the planet. It can run faster than any human. Its skin is so hard that normal weapons cannot hurt it. And its blood is acidic. If you cut one, the blood that comes out will burn through metal. The students stared at the image. Some of them looked scared. The creature was truly terrible. The Kairos hunter is not the only danger, Varun said. He showed more images. There were flying creatures with long claws. There were snake-like animals that lived in the boiling rivers. There were plants that could grab and eat anything that came too close. Everything on Cairo 7 was designed to kill. When the Eternal Dawn crashed, Varun said, the survivors had almost nothing. Most of their supplies were destroyed in the crash. They had no weapons except a few simple tools. They had no medicine except what they could carry. They had no shelter except the broken pieces of their ship. He paused and looked at the students. Now, imagine you are one of those humans. You wake up after the crash. Your ship is burning. Your friends are dead or hurt. You step outside and see a world of fire and poison. You see creatures that want to eat you. You have no help coming. No one knows where you are. What do? The room was silent. No one had an answer. In the back corner, Park Hannah looked at the images on the wall. She had seen pictures like these before. She had read descriptions of these creatures in the old journals. But hearing the professor talk about them made her feel something strange. Pride. Her family had faced all of this and survived. Varun continued his lesson. In the first week after the crash, 12 more humans died. Some died from breathing the poison air. Some died from the heat. Some were killed by the creatures. By the end of the first week, only 186 humans were still alive. He showed an image of the crash site. The ship was broken into 3 large pieces. Humans were working around it, trying to build walls and shelters. Kim Tae, the engineer, took control on the second day, Varun said. The captain was dead. The first officer was dead. Someone had to lead. Kim Tae gathered the survivors and made a plan. First, they would seal off part of the ship to create a safe place to breathe. Second, they would find water. Third, they would find food. A student with blue skin raised his hand. Where did they find water? You said the rivers were boiling. Another good question, Varun said. The humans could not drink the water from the rivers. It was too hot and full of poison. But Kim Tae remembered something from his training. He knew that if you dig deep enough into the ground, you can sometimes find cooler water. He organized teams to dig. After 3 days, they found a small underground stream. The water was not perfect, but it was cool enough to drink after they cleaned it. Varun showed another image. This one showed humans carrying containers of water from a hole in the ground. They looked tired and dirty, but they were working together. Finding water was important, Varun said, but it was not enough. They still needed food. The plants on Cairo 7 were mostly poisonous. The animals were dangerous. How could they eat? He looked around the room. This is where Elisu became important. She was a doctor and scientist. She began to study the plants and animals of Cairo 7. She tested everything. She found that some plants were not completely poisonous. If you cooked them in a special way, you could eat them. It made you sick at first, but your body could learn to handle it. The students looked surprised. They ate poison? One of them asked. Voron nodded. In small amounts, yes. Li Su discovered that human bodies could adapt. If you ate a tiny bit of poison every day, your body would slowly learn to fight it. This is something that most species cannot do. But humans can. Their bodies are very good at adapting to new things. He showed an image of Li Su. She was sitting on the ground, surrounded by plants and small containers. She was writing notes in a book. Li Su kept careful records of everything she learned, Voron said. She wrote down which plants were safe and which were deadly. She wrote down how to prepare food. She wrote down how to make medicine from the poison plants. Her notes saved many lives. Hannah felt her heart beat faster. She knew those notes. She had copies of them at home. Her grandmother had given them to her when she was a little girl. The handwriting was old and faded, but the words were still clear. Voron put his hands behind his back. By the end of the first month, the humans had created a small camp. They had water. They had food. They had shelter. But they were still in great danger. The creatures of Cairo 7 attacked them every night. The Kairos hunters came to the camp, looking for easy food. He showed an image of the camp at night. Fires burned around the edges. Humans stood with simple weapons, watching the darkness. The humans had no real weapons, Voron said. They had knives and tools from the ship. But these were not enough to kill a Kairos hunter. The creatures kept coming. People kept dying. Kim-tae knew they could not keep fighting like this. They needed a better plan. Voron smiled coldly. And this is where the story becomes truly interesting. Kim-tae did something that no one expected. Something that changed everything. But that is a story for the next part of our lesson. The students groaned. They wanted to hear more. But Voron shook his head. Patience, he said. Good stories take time. First, I want you to think about what you have heard. Think about the odds these humans faced. Think about how impossible their situation was. And then ask yourself, how did they survive? In the back corner, Hannah closed her notebook. She already knew the answer. She knew what Kim-tae had done. She knew the secret that had saved her family. But she said nothing. She just sat quietly, waiting for the professor to continue his lesson. Professor Voron gave the students a short break. They talked among themselves about what they had heard. Everyone was amazed by the story. How could humans survive on such a terrible planet? It seemed impossible that after 10 minutes, Voron called for silence. The students returned to their seats. In the back corner, Park Hannah sat up straighter. This was the part of the story she knew best. This was the part her grandmother had told her about many times. Now, Voron said, let us continue. When we stopped, the humans were in great danger. The Kairos hunters attacked every night. The humans were losing people. They could not keep fighting with simple tools. Kim-tae needed a new plan. He touched his datapad. An image appeared on the wall. It showed a small Kairos hunter, much smaller than the adults. It was inside a cage made from pieces of the crashed ship. Kim-tae did something very strange, Voron said. Instead of trying to kill all the Kairos hunters, he decided to capture one. A young one. He wanted to study it. The students looked confused. Why would he do that? One of them asked. It would just try to kill him. Voron nodded. That is what everyone thought. But Kim-tae had an idea. He had noticed something about the Kairos hunters. When they attacked, they always focused on certain people. They ignored others. Kim-tae wanted to know why. He showed another image. This one showed Kim-tae sitting near the cage, watching the young creature. Li Su was beside him, taking notes. Li Su studied the young hunter for many weeks, Lauren said. She learned that the creatures use smell to find their prey. They were attracted to certain chemicals in the body: fear, stress, panic. When humans were scared, their bodies made chemicals that the hunters could smell from far away. A student raised her hand. So the hunters could smell fear? Exactly, Voren said. And this gave Kim Tae an idea. If fear attracted the hunters, maybe something else could push them away. Li Su began to experiment. She tested different plants, different chemicals, different smells. After many tries, she found something that worked. He showed an image of Li Su holding a small container. Inside was a thick green paste. This paste was made from 3 different plants on Cairo 7, Voren explained. When humans put it on their skin, it changed their smell. The Kairos hunters did not like this new smell. They stayed away. The students murmured in surprise. Such a simple solution to such a big problem. But that was not all, Voren continued. The young hunter that Kim Tae captured began to change. It was away from the other hunters. It only saw humans. It ate food that the humans gave it. Slowly, over many months, it began to trust them. Hannah smiled a little. She knew this part of the story well. Her grandmother had told her about the first tamed hunter. Its name was Baram, which meant wind in the old Korean language. Baram had been her great-grandmother's favorite creature. Voren showed more images. They showed humans working alongside Kairos hunters. The creatures that had once attacked them were now helping them. They carried heavy loads. They protected the camp. They hunted other dangerous animals. The humans did something that no species had ever done on Cairo 7, Voren said. They tamed the predators. They turned their greatest enemy into their greatest friend. This is what we call adaptation. The humans changed their situation instead of running from it. A student in the front row shook his head. I do not understand, Professor. The hunters are wild animals. They have no intelligence. How could humans tame them? Voren raised one of his long fingers. That is a common mistake. We think that because a species looks like an animal, it must be stupid. But the Kairos hunters are not stupid. They are actually quite smart. They can learn. They can remember. They can form bonds with other creatures. The humans discovered this and used it. He walked slowly across the front of the room. This is one of the most interesting things about humans. They do not just survive. They change things. They build relationships. They make allies. On Cairo 7, they did not just hide from danger. They found ways to make the danger work for them. The professor touched his datapad again. The image changed to show the human camp after several years. It was no longer a small group of scared survivors. It was a real village. There were buildings made of stone and metal. There were gardens where food was growing. There were children playing in safe areas while tamed hunters watched over them. By the 5th year, Voren said, the humans had built a complete community. They had over 200 people. The children who were born on Cairo 7 were stronger than the children from Earth. Their bodies had adapted to the planet. They could breathe the air for short times. They could handle the heat better. They were becoming something new. He paused and looked at the students. This is the most amazing part of the human story. They did not just survive. They evolved. In just a few generations, their bodies began to change. The poison that once killed them became less dangerous. The heat that once burned them became easier to handle. Humans adapted faster than any species we have ever studied. In the back corner, Hannah touched her own arm. Her skin was slightly different from a normal human's. It was a little tougher, a little more resistant to heat. Her lungs could process air that would make other humans sick. She was proof of what the professor was saying. Her body still carried the changes that her ancestors had developed on Cairo 7, Varan continued his lesson. Li Su was the key to this survival. She did not just make the smell paste. She created medicines that helped humans adapt faster. She found plants that made their immune system stronger. She discovered ways to prepare food that gave them more energy and helped their bodies change. He showed an image of Li Su in a laboratory she had built from pieces of the ship. She was older now, her hair turning gray, but her eyes were still sharp and focused. Li Su wrote everything in journals, Varan said. Every experiment, every discovery, every failure. These journals became the most important documents in the colony. When Li Su died, her daughter continued her work, and then her granddaughter. Each generation added to the knowledge. Hannah felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. She did not want anyone to see. But hearing about her great-grandmother like this, in a classroom full of strangers, was strange and emotional. Varan showed more images. Humans building, farming, hunting with their tamed hunters. Children growing up, getting married, having their own children. The colony was becoming a real civilization. By the 20th year, Varan said, there were over 300 humans on Cairo 7, more than when the ship had crashed. They had farms that grew food. They had animals that provided meat and milk. They had schools where children learned to read and write. They had everything they needed to live. A student raised his hand. If they were doing so well, why did they leave? Why did they go back to space? Varan smiled. They did not choose to leave. After 30 years, a rescue ship finally found them. The galaxy had not forgotten about the Eternal Dawn. Search teams had been looking for them for decades. When the rescue ship arrived, it found a thriving colony. He showed an image of a sleek rescue ship landing near the human village. Humans were standing around it, looking up at the sky. Some were crying. Some were laughing. Some did not know how to feel. Many of the survivors chose to leave, Varan said. They wanted to return to the wider galaxy. They wanted their children to have more opportunities. But some chose to stay. Cairo 7 had become their home. They did not want to leave. He paused and looked at the students. The descendants of those survivors now live throughout the galaxy. Some are scientists. Some are soldiers. Some are just ordinary people living ordinary lives. But they all carry something special inside them. They carry the strength of Cairo 7. In the back corner, Hannah sat very still. She was one of those descendants. She carried that strength. And she was starting to wonder if she should tell the professor the truth. Professor Varan walked back to his desk. He put down his datapad and looked at the students. His 4 eyes seemed tired now. He had been talking for a long time. We have reached the end of the main story, he said. The rescue. The return to civilization. The beginning of new lives for the survivors of the Eternal Dawn. But before we finish, I want to share some final thoughts. The students waited. Some were leaning forward in their seats. Others were writing notes. In the back corner, Park Hannah sat very still. Her heart was beating fast. She could feel something building inside her, something that wanted to come out. Varan clasped his hands together. The story of the Eternal Dawn survivors is famous. It has been told many times. There are books about it. There are movies. There are songs. Everyone knows the basic story. But I must tell you something important. He paused and looked around the room. Much of what we know comes from secondary sources, reports from the rescue team, interviews with survivors who left the planet, stories that were passed down through generations. We do not have many primary sources. A student raised her hand. What is a primary source, Professor? A primary source is something created by the people who were there, Varan explained. A journal, a letter, a recording. Something made by Kim Tae or Li Su themselves. Something that shows us exactly what they saw and did. He shook his head slowly. Unfortunately, most of these primary sources have been lost. The journals that Li Su wrote are believed to have been destroyed. The records that Kim Tae kept are missing. All we have are copies of copies, stories of stories. We cannot verify everything. In the back corner, Hana felt her hands start to shake. She knew something that the professor did not know. The journals were not lost. They were not destroyed. They were in a box under her bed in her small room at the academy. She had brought them with her when she left home. Voron continued speaking. Because of this, many scholars question parts of the story. Did the humans really tame the Kairos hunters? Did Li Su really create medicines from poison? Some believe these are exaggerations. Legends that grew bigger over time. A student nodded. It does seem hard to believe, Professor. Humans are not that special. How could they do things that no other species has done? Voron smiled slightly. That is a fair point. Humans are remarkable in many ways, but they are not magical. It is possible that the story has been made bigger than it really was. It is possible that the survivors had help we do not know about, or they were simply very, very lucky. Hana felt something hot rising in her chest. It was anger. The professor was calling her family's story a legend. He was saying that maybe it did not happen the way people said. He was questioning everything her great-grandparents had done. She looked down at her notebook. She had written the names Kim Tae and Li Su. She had written the word family. She had drawn the planet Kairos 7. And now she had to make a choice. Should she stay quiet? Or should she speak? Voron was still talking. In the end, we may never know the full truth about the Eternal Dawn survivors. The primary sources are lost. The survivors are all dead now. Their children and grandchildren have scattered across the galaxy. The story has become more myth than history. Something inside Hana broke. She could not stay quiet anymore. She could not let the professor dismiss her family's sacrifice as a legend. Slowly, she stood up. Her chair made a small sound against the floor. The students near her turned to look. Then more students turned. Finally, Voron noticed and stopped speaking. Yes, he said, looking at Hana with his 4 eyes. Do you have a question? Hana's voice was soft, but it carried through the quiet room. It is not a legend, Professor. Voron raised one of his thin eyebrows. Excuse me? The story of the Eternal Dawn, Hana said. Her voice was becoming stronger. It is not a legend. It is not an exaggeration. It happened exactly the way you described. I know because Kim Tae and Li Su were my great-grandparents. The room went completely silent. Every student turned to look at the quiet girl in the back corner. Even Voron seemed frozen for a moment, his 4 eyes wide with surprise. Your great-grandparents? He finally said. You are claiming to be a descendant of the Eternal Dawn survivors? Hana nodded. She began to walk down the aisle between the seats. The other students moved out of her way, staring at her as she passed. My grandmother was born on Kairos 7, Hana said. She was one of the children who grew up in the colony. When the rescue ship came, she was 15 years old. She had never seen the stars. She had never been off the planet. Kairos 7 was the only home she knew. Voron was watching her closely. His eyes moved over her face, her body, looking for signs. That is a remarkable claim. Do you have any proof? Hana reached into her bag. She pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. She walked up to Voron's desk and placed it carefully on the surface. This is the first journal of Li Su, she said. My great-grandmother wrote it herself. It covers the first year after the crash. Everything is here. The crash, the first deaths, the discovery of water, the experiments with plants, the first Kairos hunter they tamed. Voron stared at the wrapped bundle. His hands were shaking slightly as he reached for it. May I? Hannah nodded. The professor carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was an old book. The cover was made of leather from some creature on Cairo 7. The pages were yellow with age, but the writing inside was still clear. Every word was neat and careful. Varun turned the pages slowly. His eyes moved quickly, reading. The more he read, the more surprised he looked. "This is incredible," he whispered. "The details match everything we know. But there is so much more here. So much we never knew." Hannah stood quietly beside the desk. "My family kept all the journals. Li Su wrote 12 of them before she died. My grandmother added 3 more. And my mother added 2. They are all real. They are all primary sources." The students were whispering to each other now. Some were standing up to see better. Everyone wanted to know more about this quiet girl who had been sitting in the back corner all this time. Varun looked up from the journal. His face had changed. The coldness was gone. Now he looked almost humble. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I called your family's story a legend. I said it might be exaggerated. I was wrong." Hannah shook her head. "You did not know. Most people do not know. My family does not talk about it much. We keep the journals hidden. We live quiet lives." "But why?" Varun asked. "This is one of the greatest survival stories in galactic history. Your family should be celebrated." Hannah thought about her grandmother's words. The old woman had told her many times why they kept quiet. "My great-grandmother did not want fame," Hannah said. "She did not save those people for glory. She did it because it was right. She did it because she loved them." The journals were never meant for the public. They were meant for family, so we would never forget where we came from. Varun closed the journal gently. He looked at Hannah with new respect. "Would you be willing to share these with the Academy?" he asked. "They can help us understand human survival in ways we never imagined." Hannah paused. She had not expected this question. She looked at the old journal, at the careful handwriting of her great-grandmother. She thought about what Li Su would want. Finally, she nodded. "I will think about it. But first, I want to finish hearing your lesson. I want to know what the galaxy thinks about my family. The truth and the myths. All of it." Varun smiled. It was a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Then please," he said, "sit wherever you like. You are no longer just a student in this class. You are the most important person in this room." Hannah walked to an empty seat in the front row. For the first time since she arrived at the academy, she did not sit in the back corner. She sat in the front where everyone could see her. And she was not afraid anymore. The classroom was different now. Everything had changed in just a few minutes. The quiet girl from the back corner was sitting in the front row. The old journal lay on the professor's desk. And every student in the room was looking at Park Hano with new eyes. Professor Varun stood behind his desk, holding the journal carefully. He seemed almost afraid to touch it, as if it might break. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a student in the middle of the room raised her hand. She was a young female from the water world of Delphus. Her skin was light blue, and her eyes were large and dark. "Can you tell us more about your family?" she asked Hannah. "What happened after the rescue? Where did they go?" Hannah turned in her seat to face the class. It felt strange to have so many eyes on her. She had spent her whole life staying quiet, staying hidden. Now everyone wanted to hear her speak. "My grandmother was 15 when the rescue ship came," Hannah began. "Her name was Kim Yuna. She was the granddaughter of Kim, Tae, and Li Su. She was born on Cairo 7. It was the only home she knew." She paused, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her. When the rescue ship landed, Yuna did not want to leave. She loved Cairo 7. She loved the land, the creatures, even the heat and the poison air. Her body had adapted to it. She was more at home on that death world than she would ever be anywhere else. Voren nodded slowly. But she left anyway? Yes, Hannah said. Her parents made her go. They wanted her to have a better life. They wanted her to see the stars, to meet other species, to learn new things. So she got on the rescue ship and left her home behind. Hannah looked down at her hands. She told me it was the hardest thing she ever did. Harder than surviving on Kairos 7. Harder than fighting the hunters or eating poison plants. Leaving was harder than all of it. The room was very quiet. Every student was listening carefully. My grandmother traveled across the galaxy, Hannah continued. She visited many planets. She met many species. But she never felt at home anywhere. She always felt like a stranger. The people around her did not understand what she had been through. They did not know what it meant to grow up on a death world. A student raised his hand. Did she ever go back to Kairos 7? Hannah smiled sadly. Once, when she was 60 years old, she took a small ship and went back to see her home. The colony was still there. Some of the original survivors had stayed behind. They had children and grandchildren who had never left the planet. She closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's words. She said it was beautiful. The colony had grown into a real city. There were thousands of people living there. They had tamed hundreds of hunters. They had built farms and schools and hospitals. They had turned a death world into a home. Voren set the journal down gently. And what about you? How did you end up here, at the Galactic Academy? Hannah opened her eyes. My mother met my father when she was traveling. He was from Delphus, a water world on the other side of the galaxy. They fell in love and got married. I was born on a space station between their two worlds. I am half human and half Delphin. She touched her arm. But I still carry the changes from Kairos 7. My skin is tougher than a normal human's. My lungs can handle bad air. My body can adapt to heat and cold faster than most species. These gifts were passed down from my great-grandparents. They are part of me. A student in the back row stood up. He was tall and covered with green scales. You said humans do not believe in impossible. What does that mean? Hannah thought for a moment. This was the heart of everything. This was what her family had taught her since she was a little girl. When the eternal dawn crashed, she said, everyone should have died. The air was poison. The creatures were killers. There was no hope. Any other species would have given up. They would have accepted that survival was impossible. She stood up from her seat and faced the class. But humans do not think that way. When we see something impossible, we do not accept it. We do not give up. We look at the impossible thing and we say, how can I change this? How can I make this work? What can I do to survive? And then we do it. Her voice was strong now, confident. My great-grandfather, Kimte, was not a hero. He was an engineer, a normal man who fixed machines. But when everyone around him was dying, he did not give up. He found solutions. He built shelters. He tamed predators. He kept people alive. She looked at Professor Voren. My great-grandmother, Lisu, was not a legend. She was a doctor who was scared and tired and wanted to go home. But she did not give up. She studied the poison and made it into medicine. She turned death into life. She saved hundreds of people. Voren bowed his head slightly. They were remarkable humans. They were just humans, Hannah said. That is the point. They were not special. They did not have powers or magic. They were soft and weak and afraid. But they kept going anyway. That is what makes humans different. We do not stop. We do not accept impossible. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the students began to clap. The sound grew louder and louder until the whole room was filled with applause. Even Voren joined in, his thin hands making soft sounds as they came together. Hannah felt tears in her eyes again. But this time, she did not try to hide them. She let them fall. When the applause finally stopped, Voren spoke again. I have been teaching at this academy for 40 years. I have told the story of the eternal dawn many times, but I have never truly understood it until today. He picked up the journal and held it out to Hannah. Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for reminding us what humans can do. Hannah took the journal and held it against her chest. Thank you for teaching about my family. Even if you did not know the whole truth, you kept their memory alive. As the class ended and students began to leave, many of them stopped to talk to Hannah. They asked her questions. They thanked her for sharing her story. Some of them asked if they could read the journals. For the first time in her life, Hannah did not feel like a stranger. She felt like she belonged. Voren waited until most of the students had left. Then he walked over to Hannah. What will you do now? He asked. Hannah thought about it. She looked at the journal in her hands, at the careful writing of her great-grandmother. She thought about all the stories that had never been told, all the knowledge that was still hidden in those old pages. I think I will share the journals, she said. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully. I think the galaxy should know the truth about what happened on Cairo 7, not the legend, the real story. Voren nodded. And what about you? What will you study here at the academy? Hannah smiled. It was the first real smile she had given since she arrived at the school. I want to study survival, she said. I want to learn how different species face impossible situations. I want to understand what makes some species give up and what makes others keep fighting. She looked out the window at the twin suns setting on the horizon. And maybe someday I will go back to Cairo 7. I will see the world that made my family who they are. I will walk on the ground where my great-grandparents survived the impossible. Voren placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a gentle touch, full of respect. I think you will do great things, Hannah, he said. You carry the strength of Cairo 7 inside you. You carry the spirit of Kim Tae and Lisu. Whatever you choose to do, I know you will not give up. Because you are human. And humans do not believe in impossible. Hannah nodded. She walked out of the classroom and into the warm evening light. The twin suns painted the sky orange and gold. Somewhere out there, across the vast darkness of space, Cairo 7 was waiting for her. Her family's home. Her legacy. She was no longer the quiet girl in the back corner. She was Hannah, great-great-granddaughter of the survivors. And she was ready to show the galaxy what humans could do.